In-laws made me sign a prenup because they thought I was poor. Now that I'm worth 5 times more than them, they want to dissolve it and are trying to force my wife to divorce me. 8 years ago, my wife and I got married. But before that, my in-laws decided to make me sign a prenup. I found that a bit insulting at the time because they had made it quite clear to me that I was not really welcome in their family. So making me sign the prenup just felt like an even bigger slap in the face. I had been working in sales when I met my wife, but after being with her for a year, I decided to quit my job and start my own electronics brand. We were both 27 at the time, and by the time I officially started my business, I was almost 28. My wife had been supportive throughout the process, and she was the happiest when I finally got to work on my dream business. Her parents, however, were not happy. They thought I was living off her money, which was true to a certain extent. She was definitely supporting me because I didn't have a steady income, but it's not like I was completely relying on her. At 29, I decided to propose, and we got married within a year. But a couple of months before our wedding, her parents came to me and told me I needed to sign a prenup that stated that, in the case of a divorce, all our assets and money would be kept separate. I could not stake a claim to anything that was hers, and vice versa. In case of a divorce, I would also have to repay my wife and my in-laws for having supported me while I was working on my business. They had occasionally sent money to my wife. I'm pretty sure they included a clause that even my wife wouldn't be able to stake a claim to anything that was mine, so it would all be fair. The agreement even stated that if we decided to have a joint account, the money would be divided based on who contributed more. My in-laws just assumed that throughout our marriage my wife would be supporting me. When they approached me with it, they told me that signing the prenup was the only way they would feel safe accepting me as their son-in-law. It was quite insulting for several reasons. Firstly, they assumed I would always rely on my wife and never be able to make something of myself, which was an unfair assumption because I was already working hard at the time to get my business going. Secondly, even before I quit my job to start my business, they had never liked me. They had a problem with me right from the beginning. From the first time my wife introduced me to her parents, they didn't think I was good enough to be dating their daughter, and by good I mean rich. For context, my in-laws have a real estate firm and have done quite well ever since they started. They come from financially well-off backgrounds, while my parents had normal jobs. My dad was a high school football coach, and my mom was the manager at a nearby coffee shop. So I didn't exactly struggle with money growing up. Right from the start, they looked down on me with snarky remarks, mean comments disguised as jokes, and just an insufferable attitude around me in general. I never said a word about it, even though my wife got quite worked up about their behavior, because I didn't want them to know they had gotten under my skin. I believed the best way to deal with them was by not paying any heed to them because I knew my wife loved me and I loved her, and that was enough for both of us. I didn't need their approval. So even when they approached me with the prenup, I felt insulted, but I signed it. When they took it to my wife, both of us knew exactly what they were trying to accomplish. They were trying to play games and insult me right before the wedding, hoping I would back off so they could accomplish what they had set out to do, sideline me, and somehow get their daughter to be with somebody more appropriate by their standards. Unfortunately for them, they haven't been able to do that, and they won't be able to because my wife and I are always going to be on the same team. That was several years ago. Since then, I have made a lot of progress in my career. My business grew, and I kept working at it, and in the last 2 years it took off exponentially, doing better than it ever had. Something worked in our favor greatly: social media marketing, and all the hard work I had put into my company finally paid off. As of now, I'm worth almost 5 times more than my in-laws. Now, of course, they want to dissolve the prenup. A couple of days ago, they came to visit us. We were having dinner together, and after dinner, once our son was in bed, they got us to sit down and told us that they had been giving it a lot of thought and felt it was time to speak to their lawyers about dissolving the Prenup. My wife looked surprised, and even I was taken aback for an instant. But then I decided to decline. I told them I didn't think it was necessary, since they had claimed that the Prenup was the only way they would feel safe accepting me as their son-in-law. I didn't want them to lose their safety net. I was obviously being sarcastic, and they picked up on that even though I tried to sound sincere. They told me that several years had passed, we now had a son together, and they no longer had any reason to have doubts about me. But I still declined and told them I wasn't open to discussing it any more. When I said that, they started to get agitated, telling me that it was their idea to have the Prenup in the first place, so now I should respect whatever they say and have it dissolved. They argued that because they are older and more experienced, we should take their advice to avoid bitterness in the future. Honestly, I had no idea what they were talking about, but after some bickering, I told them I didn't want to discuss the Prenup any more. Since my wife and I had no plans of getting divorced anytime soon, they should drop it as well. But they refused to let it. All the drama that we had been sweeping under the rug for so many years started coming out. I finally brought up how they had only made me sign the Prenup to humiliate me and remind me that I wasn't in the same tax bracket as them. Now that I had surpassed them, they suddenly wanted to pretend none of that had ever happened. Their point was that they only wanted their daughter's future to be secure, in case I turned out to be a gold-digging husband who would leech off her. They wanted her to at least have a safety net in the form of the Prenup. They were just looking out for her. The argument went on for a while, and after some time I was too tired to keep arguing. I told them I was done and wanted them to leave. I thought I was being reasonable. Our son was asleep. Besides, it was quite late, and I just wanted to get some sleep. However, they took offense at that and told me the only reason I was able to get to where I am today was because of the support that their daughter and they had given me. I disagreed. They never supported me. They only ever supported their daughter. Yes, they occasionally sent money to us while I was working on my business, but that money was for my wife. We could have easily survived without their help. The only times they sent money was when my wife asked for it, and it was specifically for her, not for me. I had offered to dip into my savings several times, but she told me not to because her parents had the money, and as long as they were sending it, they wouldn't have an issue with it. They never supported me emotionally. They had never made me feel like part of the family, and they had no right to say that I wouldn't have gotten to where I am today without their support. I believe I could have easily done it on my own. So when I said that to them, they started yelling at me even louder. The fight got worse because they thought I was being ungrateful, even though they had never taken into account how they had treated me. At one point, they turned to my wife and told her that she needed to make a choice. They had tried to support our relationship for as long as they could, but this was getting out of hand since I refused to acknowledge their contributions at all. Somehow my wife convinced them to leave. Since then we haven't spoken. She has stayed in touch with her parents, trying to get them to apologize, but I told her I don't need an apology. I just want space from them. I want them to be able to have a relationship with her and our son, but I don't feel like repairing my relationship with them right now, especially after everything that happened. Recently, I learned from my wife that, while she was trying to convince them to apologize, they were trying to brainwash her into divorcing me. Last evening, she showed me a bunch of messages. She seemed pretty upset because she had been trying so hard to get things back to normal. Her son really loves his grandparents, and she didn't want things to get weird. But after reading those messages, I'm not so sure anymore. They were refusing to acknowledge the fact that they had ever treated me badly, and they were accusing me of being ungrateful for their support. They believe that's why my wife should divorce me because I don't respect them. It's all rubbish they're feeding her to brainwash her into divorcing me. She isn't buying any of it. She's just exhausted, trying to talk sense into them. The only thing she does think they have a point on is the fact that they did support us financially in the early days when I was working on my business and she was taking care of all the expenses. However, I don't feel like acknowledging that because it was clearly only because they didn't want to say no to their daughter. It had nothing to do with me. If my wife had allowed me to, I would have used my savings to contribute, and we wouldn't have had to rely on them at all. But even after all this, they keep trying to paint me as a villain. After a couple of weeks had passed since the blow-up with my in-laws, things between my wife and me had settled somewhat. We weren't fighting, but there was a quiet tension in the air. We weren't exactly happy, but we weren't exactly miserable either. It was just still. Neither of us knew what to do next, but at least there were no more heated arguments. It wasn't the kind of peace I wanted. This kind of peace felt like a truce rather than a resolution, but it was where we were. I had kept my word about paying back the money my in-laws had given us during those early years. It wasn't much when I thought about how far I'd come now, but it seemed like the only way to stop them from constantly wielding the "we helped you" narrative like a weapon. I was done with feeling indebted, even if it was more a psychological debt than a financial one. I didn't want my in-laws' contributions to continue defining me in their eyes, especially when they had never once made me feel like I belonged in their family. That's what I told my wife when I suggested writing them a check. To me, it was a clean break, a way to sever that last. But of course, as with everything with them, it wasn't that simple. When my wife delivered the check to them, they refused it outright. Their response shocked her. They weren't interested in the money, they told her. What they wanted was respect, the kind of respect I'd never shown them, they claimed. They accused me of disrespecting them over the years, never acknowledging the sacrifices they'd made for us. They said I had always acted as though I was above them, as though their opinions didn't matter, and now I was refusing to acknowledge the help they gave us in the early days when we were struggling. Reading between the lines, it was clear to me that they didn't care about the money at all. They wanted me to grovel, to give them the kind of gratitude that I had never felt for them. They wanted me to admit that I needed them, that I was just a small-time guy who was lucky to have their daughter, and now that I had money, I needed to give them the recognition they thought they deserved. It was such a toxic game to play. They had never once treated me like family. They had always looked down on me, mocked me for being lesser than them, even when I was working my hardest to build something on my own. They could never accept that I was doing things my own way, building a life and a future on my terms. To them, I was just some guy who had lucked into a little bit of success, and they needed me to admit it. And then came the divorce talk again. They were relentless, making it clear to my wife that if I wouldn't give them the respect they thought they were entitled to, then maybe I wasn't the right person for her. Maybe, they said, she should start rethinking her marriage. Maybe it was better to make the decision now before it was too late. When my wife showed me the messages they had sent her, I was livid. I had always known that they resented me, but seeing it in black and white, hearing them tell her that I didn't love her enough to respect her family, was like a punch in the gut. They were trying to undermine our marriage, trying to convince her that everything we had built together was built on shaky ground because of my actions. They made it sound like they were the ones who had our best interests at heart, when in reality all they wanted was to control the situation. But here's the thing, my wife wasn't buying it. She had tried for so long to fix the situation. She had tried to reason with them, to get them to see things from my perspective, but they were having none of it. They didn't want to be reasonable. They wanted to win. They wanted to be right. And in their eyes, being right meant tearing apart everything we had built together. It meant pushing my wife to pick a side. At first, she had been torn. She didn't want to lose her family, especially since they had a relationship with our son. But as the weeks went on, she began to realize that their actions weren't about caring for her or for us. They weren't trying to protect her, they were trying to control her. They were using guilt, trying to make her feel like her love for me wasn't enough, that she was somehow betraying them by standing by me. One night, after another tearful phone call with her mother, she came to me completely drained. She looked at me, and for the first time in a long time, I could see that she was ready to stop trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. She told me that she had had enough of trying to make everyone happy. She had been walking on eggshells, trying to smooth things over, but it was tearing her apart. "I'm tired too," she admitted, her voice soft but firm. "I've tried to make them see that we're a team, that we're in this together, but they won't listen. I can't keep going back and forth, trying to fix what's broken when they won't even acknowledge their part in this." I knew then that we were finally on the same page. We didn't need to fix them. We needed to focus on our family and what we had built without their interference. It wasn't going to be easy, but at least we could stop trying to make the impossible happen. At least we could stop pretending that their approval mattered. Because in the end it didn't. I don't know what will happen next. My wife still talks to her parents from time to time, but it's strained. The tension is still there, hovering in the background. We're not all fixed, but at least we're not letting their dysfunction dictate our lives anymore. We've set boundaries, and while they don't like it, they'll have to deal with it. I'm not sure how this whole thing is going to play out in the long run, but one thing is clear: I'm done trying to make them like me. I'm done trying to fit into their mold of what they think I should be. I'll keep working, I'll keep providing for my family, and I'll keep loving my wife the way she deserves to be loved. Whether or not they approve is no longer my problem. As for my in-laws, they can keep their egos. They can keep their judgment. But they'll no longer control me. They'll no longer control my wife. And if they think they can destroy our family, they've got another thing coming. We're stronger than they think. And if they can't respect that, then maybe they'll finally understand what it feels like to be on the outside looking in.